Hey, everybody. I first want to say that I'm really honored to be part of this panel, that I stand in the light of the leadership of so many folks who are going to speak to us today. And one of those people is Donna. And Donna and I thought it would be good to get us started by having each member of the panel introduce themselves in the context of who they are and how they got to this work. Alan, do you want to start us out?
Oh, really? You could do that to me? Okay.
Yeah, I am.
So I'm Alan Jenkins. I'm the president of the Opportunity Agenda. We're a social justice communication lab here in New York. I guess I will tell the very quick story of I'm a recovering constitutional litigator and civil rights lawyer, but I also spent time at the Justice Department arguing cases on behalf of the United States in the U.S. Supreme Court. And I never saw one of those cases on behalf of the United States that I thought reduced harm out in the world. And I'm talking now about criminal justice cases. And yet, during my time with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, I saw the pervasive influence of racial bias in our system. And those two realities, it seems to me, are completely unacceptable. And so that's one of the things that brings me to this work.
Is it afternoon yet? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored and happy to be in a space right now talking about the elephant in the room, because it has been and it actually continues to be the elephant in the room. So I'm very thankful, Danielle, for you having this. With that, how did I get to be here? Who am I? So my name is Donna Hilton. I'm formerly known as inmate 86G0206. In 1985, I was part of a crime that led to the death of a human being. And what happened as being as a young black girl at that time, the media tried me, identified me, vilified me, dehumanized me, and tried me before I was even able to tell my own story. My narrative has never been told. And this is why I'm thankful that we have these conversations today, so I can tell my own narrative, and others like me can tell our own narrative, especially women. And I thank you, Fatima, for sharing what you shared earlier, because it takes a lot of courage to do that, and it brings a lot out. So I thank you for that, and I recognize it. And with that, I'll say that as a 19-year-old girl, I was caught up into a situation that I had no understanding how I got there and how to get out of it. Number one, I was a victim myself in the crime. But no one paid attention to that. No one even listened to me, heard my story. No one even cared to ask me who I was until I was in front of the officer that was writing my pre-sentence report. That was the first person ever in the judicial system that asked me who I am, how old I was, and how did I get there. They wanted to know a background, my background. Of course, they wrote whatever they wrote, but no one, even during the trial, even through the process, asked me anything. So it never came out that I also was under duress and coercion in a crime that took the life of a human being. But in that, I still take responsibility. It's funny, because not too long ago, questions came out about how could I speak up when I don't take responsibility or accountability for a crime that I was involved in. I am doing what I do because I take responsibility and accountability. I would never have the gumption, the compassion to even stand up here and to say and to bring to light that there was a victim in the crime, but there are so many victims, right, in our communities. And thank you, Ms. Dorothy, for saying you pointed that out. We are victimized often, continually, over and over and over and over again, especially black and brown women. Before I was even looked at as a human being, there was a story that was written for me, and I became a thug, I became a monster, I became a leader of a girl gang, I became so many things, and none of them touched the truth of who I was in my humanity. And so that's why I do today, because I recognize the humanity in myself, and that way I'm able to recognize the humanity in the person whose life was taken and all other lives that have been subjected to violence and continue to be subjected to violence.
Well, is this one working? Yeah. I'm Scott Roberts. I'm Senior Criminal Justice Campaigns Director at Color of Change, in case you didn't read that part in the bio. Was not ready for this question. I'm kind of all over the place with it. There was a set of questions sent around. This was not one of them.
I warned you that that was just a guide.
But it's a good question. Offer my excuses up front for the meandering way I'm going to answer it. My work focuses on criminal justice, but I came to the work from a racial justice organizing. I'm from a small town in Southern Virginia, Emporia, Virginia. No bad. Thank you. I was hoping to get the same love to Mario got, but no. For Akron. But it is, they have a saying that it's 60 miles south of Richmond and 60 years behind. It's a majority black area, but most of the time that I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was controlled by a small white power structure. And so I was drugged into politics by my family, which had been doing racial justice organizing in that place for like 4 generations. And so I think that's how I got engaged and paying attention to what was going on in our community. And then the criminal justice system became more and more pervasive as I aged. We are one of those places that in the early 90s, we lost all of our manufacturing, replaced that with 4 prisons. I remember the 4th grade, we took a tour of the new prison because it was this economic development moment. At the same time, I started seeing the young people that I had grown up with, and the great vast inequalities in a community like that, starting to go away to juvenile hall, stuff like that. And the thing I picked up on here, which I think connects to the point of today, is I think early on recognized that it was all the young people that I knew who were coming from the homes with the most issues, who had the least resources, things of that nature, who were getting caught up in the system, and they were being sent away for very minor things like shoplifting. And when they would come back, it would pretty much be over. They might come back to school for a couple days, and you wouldn't see them again. Finally, I had a very personal experience with an uncle. He was an addict, is an addict, and he was forced into what they call a straw purchase, gun purchase. He was in debt to his dealer. His dealer forced him to make a buy. He went to federal prison behind that, where he almost died because he was not given, the proper medical treatment. I think that was right at the point where I was trying to figure out what I was going to be doing, and it really focused me on our criminal justice system. And I think, for me, all of those pieces have kind of worked together to bring me here, because I recognized early on that the system that we have is really cutting people off before they even get a chance, and it's not addressing or dealing with the issues. In fact, the people that I saw who needed the most help were the people who were getting caught up in the system. So.
My name is Bruce Weston. I'm a sociologist at Harvard, and I chair the program in criminal justice policy there. We like to say that the mission of that program is working towards a positive role for justice institutions in disadvantaged communities. I never started out as a criminal justice researcher. I was a student of poverty and inequality, and that's where I did most of my early work. And I did a lot of work on unemployment and trying to understand the demography of unemployment in the United States. And in all of the work on labour markets and joblessness, we never really considered how the institutionalisation of segments of the population affected how we understood unemployment statistics. And so back in the 90s now, I started to try and calculate unemployment rates that counted people who are incarcerated as part of the population. And as part of that work, I started to try and calculate incarceration rates for different segments of the population. So I was sitting in my office in Princeton, and I knew at that time, in the late 90s, that the incarceration rate in the US was about 600 per 100,000, which is 0.6 of 1% of the US population. And I was using survey data, I was trying to calculate the incarceration rate for African American men under age 35 who had dropped out of high school. And I was working on it with my research assistant, Becky Pettit, and Becky brings in the computer output, and she says the number of people incarcerated, African American men, dropped out of high school under 35, was about 30%. And I said, that can't be right. You've made a mistake. Must be 3%, right? You're out by a factor of 10. And so she goes away and comes back later that afternoon, and the incarceration rate was, in fact, 30%. And I was working in the poverty field, and no one knew this in my research community. And I thought, man, there is a social crisis in our criminal justice system. There's a social crisis in America, and it's largely unknown. And so I sort of became obsessed with trying to make understood the level of incarceration, particularly among African American men with low levels of schooling, and I thought the numbers would speak for themselves, and they would influence policy, and we would see this, and everything would change. And anyone who says the numbers should speak for themselves shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the political process, actually. And so a lot of the work we've been doing more recently is to try and humanize the problem of mass incarceration and try to produce a much more human understanding in the public conversation.
Well, thank you. I'm Sofia Elijah, and I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance of Families for Justice, which is a new organization designed to support, empower, and mobilize families of people who are incarcerated and people with a criminal record. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of the Correctional Association, which has the unique distinction of being one of only 2 organizations in the country with the legislative mandate to monitor prison conditions inside prisons and jails throughout New York State. I am a criminal defense attorney by training, and I've also been a law professor for almost 20 years. The last 12 years I did at Harvard Law School as a deputy director of the Criminal Justice Institute under Charles Ogletree, where we represented young people and adults charged with misdemeanors and felonies in Roxbury and Dorchester, 2 of the poorest communities in Massachusetts. I've studied the criminal injustice system and the prison system not only here, but also in Cuba, which has a much more unique and forward-thinking approach to these issues than we suffer from here in the United States, which I'm happy to talk about later on. And on a personal level, I've personally been arrested 3 times. I've had my childhood sweetheart go to prison at the same time that I went to college because of his drug addiction, and I watched his family destroyed by his incarceration, despite the fact that he had been a straight-A student and had a full scholarship to college. He also had a drug addiction that resulted in the destruction of his life and that of his family. So from a personal level and a professional level, I think that is why I'm here, and I'm very happy and honored to share the, shall we say, the stage with the rest of my co-panelists.
My name is Michael McBride. I am the National Director of the Live Free campaign of the PICO National Network, which is a large network of faith congregations. I'd like to introduce myself by first saying that I'm a 4th generation holiness Pentecostal, which means that we do speak in tongues and swing from the chandeliers, and on a good Sunday we may even levitate. But I'm also a native of San Francisco, California, born to, my parents, black folks, working class folks, but we lived in the Bayview Hunters Point community. And so being a holiness Pentecostal, fourth generation, did not inculcate me from the reality of the crack epidemic. It did not keep me from being a victim of crime in my community with friends, whether we robbed folk or got robbed. It did not keep me from attending a low-performing school. And certainly it didn't keep me from being physically and sexually assaulted by 2 white police officers while I was studying to be a youth pastor. So for me, I come to this work particularly because after that assault happened, my church really rose up in a powerful way to support me. I was 20-something years old, and a lot of my young people, about 100 young folks that we had grown our youth group to, told me that this happened to them regularly. And I said, well, how come you never came and told any of us about it so we could support you? And they said, we didn't think the church was a place to bring this part of our lives. And so every day I wake up, I'm haunted by that question. Why is that I can be trusted with your soul but not your body? What is my responsibility then as a faith leader to make sure that we are unleashing the power of faith institutions, moral institutions, to be on the front lines of dismantling the systems of violence, oppression, exploitation that are often visited upon the bodies of folk that have a lot of melanin in their skin. And so our work has been making sure that we take seriously that all violence is state violence, and that the line between a victim and a perpetrator is, in my experience, very invisible once you really drill down to understand the circumstances in which people are raising from the soil of their life experiences. So I'm certainly glad to be here as well, and look forward to the conversation.
So, part of what we really want to get at is the idea of how do we create racially equitable strategies, responses to violence, right? And it seems to me that in order to really get to that, we have to unpackage a lot of racialized mythologies and norms. And Pastor Mike, I would love if you could start us out by thinking through, and if others could join, what are the entrenched racialized mythologies and norms that have to be interrogated and overturned in order to really create racially just and equitable responses to violence?
Well, I certainly believe that the greatest system that has to be dismantled is white supremacy, racial hierarchy, this idea that our lives are assigned value based on our race, based on our gender, based on the amount of possessions we have our own, based on our social location. And that is a function of white supremacy. And so, certainly we used to say it a lot more nicely before Ferguson happened. But once you breathe some tear gas, you lose all your filters, touch your neighbor, right? And you just got to tell it like it is. And I think one of the great challenges, quite honestly, I'm known to be a little upsetting to some folk, but y'all pray my strength, right? Is that we have found that most efforts to address issues of racial justice and injustice, particularly by the progressive community, is still attempting to do it without an analysis around race. And much of that is because there are a lot of white folk who take up a lot of space in the racial justice space and don't want to go do their own work around race and want to bog all those black, brown, and other folk down and ask them to do the work for them. And so part of what we have to do, honestly, I believe, is to encourage our white brothers and sisters and loved ones to follow the instincts of people of color directly impacted, even if you don't understand. Because how many know a lot of things I've done for white folk that I did not understand? Touch your neighbor, somebody, right? And I do think that is still a function even among and within our advocate ally community, that unless our white brothers and sisters understand where we're going, that a lot of our work can easily become mucked down in the mire. And so white supremacy, racial hierarchy is not just about the overt violence that is visited upon our bodies, but it is also about the microaggressions. It is about the ways in which, even within our own liberation centers and struggles, we have to continue to make folks believe that these systems are not only real, but are functional, insidious, and literally taking our lives. And I'll stop there because I am a black preacher and I go on all day.
Well, I think in order for us to get down to the nitty-gritty in this question, we have to be willing to take a step back and acknowledge that we, the collective in the United States, have bred and celebrate a violent society. We can't expect the individuals to be devoid of the larger society. We play to young people who we know are impulsive because of the formulation of the brain to come and serve in the military and glorify them going around the globe, killing people they've never seen who have never done anything to them. We celebrate that and we give them all kinds of supports when they come home. We glorify ads that objectify women on the sides of buses and subways. And then when young men or women engage in the same kind of behavior, we demonize them. We refuse to punish police officers and corrections officers who go around in their uniform jobs brutalizing and victimizing and objectifying and terrorizing black and brown people. And then when someone black or brown is accused of doing the same thing, then they suddenly are demonized. So we give promotions to people who are paid with our tax dollars to do the same thing that we cage other people to do. So the key to this is to get real about our hypocrisy. Okay? We are living in a hypocrisy society. There was a gentleman who got drunk, picked up a shotgun, and shot his best friend in the face. And he was never investigated. There was never any crime. There was never any arrest. And that's because his name was Dick Cheney. Okay? But I'll tell you, as a criminal defense attorney, if Jamal or Leroy or Hakeem had done the same thing, he would never get out of prison, and nobody in this society would have any problem with it. Okay? So we have to get real and get honest about our hypocrisy and the fact that as long as we breed and celebrate a violent society, we're going to breed violence. I would love to know if the same kind of conversation that we're having here today is happening in Garden City or the Upper East Side or any all-white community. I would submit to you that it is not, because we're only concerned with violence when we are alleging that it's being perpetrated by black and brown people.
It's striking to me how profoundly racialized the problem of mass incarceration and the related problem of community violence is. And thinking about it as a student of the growth of imprisonment over the last 40 years, the system grew out of politics that conjured up fears of black criminality, the violence of black men. That was the symbolism of tough on crime politics, and it's very much in evidence today. And to create a system in which incarceration is 5 times higher than its historic average, the racial disparity in incarceration is 7 to 1. So African Americans are 7 times more likely to go to prison than whites. To conjure up a system like that, I think, requires a profound level of dehumanization in our politics, in which the communities in which the burdens of the criminal justice system are falling most heavily are something less than full members of the rest of the American community. And I think that's the big political challenge we have, but it's complicated because there are real challenging problems of violence in our most disadvantaged communities. And the conversation we're having about that problem is the wrong conversation because we've created mass incarceration as the solution. I think that's the genius of this meeting, actually, that Danielle is forcing a conversation between criminal justice reformers who want to see the system scaled back and people who are dealing with the problems of community violence in a very real way on the ground. It's a very challenging and difficult conversation because I think the panels we heard this morning, the people we saw on those panels are much further ahead, I think, in their thinking about the problems of violence than the current voices that are dominating the political debate in such a racialised way.
So I just want to stop you right there and ask this to the other folks on the panel. Many of you know that the work that I've done as a human rights lawyer has been focused on how our black and brown children who are disproportionately black and brown girls are bought and sold for sex in this country. And that there is almost full impunity for those who buy our children for sex. And that my work has been insisting on the end of impunity for them, right? That they have to go to prison. And I struggle and really want to hear from you all. How do you hold that truth? Because it's also a racial justice truth that when our black and brown girls are raped on a serial basis, that there is impunity in response to the horror done to them. And, right, the reality of a criminal justice system that is organized around racial inequity.